Konia, I'm sorry, Honia. Chris Herron,
Present.
Chief Peters,
Present.
and Chief Carter.
Present.
Okay, next order of business is approval of the minutes from our September 28th, 2017 meeting. Are there any corrections? With hearing no corrections, is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
By, okay, by Mr., I'm sorry, by Cullen. By Mr. Cullen, do we have a second?
I second.
A second by Paul Troxel. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Is there any opposed? Motion carries.
I will abstain since I was not here, so.
Okay, Sheriff will abstain. Sheriff Hundia. Next order of business is a closed session. State 911 Advisory Board may meet to consider possible and pending litigation, personnel matters, and 911 outage information in a session closed to the public pursuant to attorney-client privilege and statutory exemption to the Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Act. So we will adjourn to closed section. Okay, we'll call the committee meeting or the advisory board meeting back into session. We have nothing to report out from the closed session, so we'll move on with agenda item number 4, which we have to strike. Unfortunately, Sheriff Martin is not available to come to this meeting today, so we will strike that. See if we can get him rescheduled for next time. Next is a legislative update by Mr. Salvador. Reggie?
Good afternoon, folks. So just a couple of bills to be mentioned on both the state and the federal side. On the state side, there's a bill that's still currently in play, AB 375 by Assemblymember Chow, which would enact the California Broadband Internet Privacy Act. And the purpose of this was to reinstate the consumer privacy protections enacted by the FCC in October of 2016, but had been eliminated by the Trump administration and Congress. So that bill had been amended in the Senate and is currently awaiting action for committee assignment. Additionally, AB 1665 by Assemblymember Garcia makes various changes to the California Advanced Services Fund, or the CASF, which also includes revising the goal of the program to approve funding for infrastructure projects that will provide broadband access to no less than 98% of California households. This also revises the eligibility requirements for projects and project applicants and creates the broadband adoption account to increase broadband access and digital inclusion, and requires additional program audits and reporting. That had also been signed by Governor Brown back in October. Lastly, on the state side, SB 649 by Senator Hueso, that was known essentially as the small cell bill. It would have, among many things, small cells would be only subject to a city or county permitting process if located in a public right-of-way zone. That had been vetoed by the governor also in October. On the federal side, there is Senate Bill 102 by Ms. Cantwell from Washington, which is the Securing Access to Networks in Disaster Act. It authorizes phone, internet, broadcast, and pay TV providers access to disaster sites during an emergency so that they can restore and maintain services. It also requires an FCC study of alternative access to 911 services during times of emergency, as well as a Government Accountability Office study on how executive departments can better ensure essential communications services remain operational during times of an emergency. That had passed the Senate and is now awaiting a House committee assignment to be heard for a vote. Also, H.R. 588 by Mr. Poloni out of New Jersey is the companion bill on the House side for that Senate Bill 102 by Ms. Cantwell. That essentially does the same thing, but that had also passed the House and is now sitting in the Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation. Lastly, just last month, Senator Nelson out of Florida introduced Senate Bill 2061, which is the Next Gen 911 Act of 2017. That makes the transition to Next-Gen 911 a national priority by furthering state and federal cooperation to build Next-Gen 911 systems nationwide. It refocuses federal efforts to support Next-Gen 911 and provides necessary resources to use and develop and implement Next-Gen 911 transition plans. It also seeks to accomplish several goals, including funding, uniform technical standards, cybersecurity and training, as well as governance. That is also currently awaiting action in the Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation. And that's it for now.
Any questions for Mr. Salvador? Okay, moving on to item number 6, Firstnet update. The opt-out, opt-in decision has to be made by our governor by 1 week from today, December 28th. In the latter part of November, as part of our due diligence process to evaluate all potential courses of action for the state, including building its own radio access network, the state did issue a request for proposal, which closed. The responses have been evaluated, and pending the decision by the governor, if the governor should elect to opt out on December 28th, going into the 29th of December, then we can begin negotiations with the prevailing vendor there. If not, and the governor elects to opt in, then the results of the request for proposal will be waived. So we are continuing in negotiations with AT&T. That is the FirstNet contracted vendor to deliver to our state the most robust system that they're able to or willing to put forth, and those negotiations are continuing, and we've got, as I said, 7 days to reach final conclusion on that. So, any questions? Moving on to agenda item number 7, Mr. Cullen, Carrier Budge, again regarding updates on the 911 emergency communications branch.
Good afternoon. So I'll be covering these topics on the slides. If there's anything that I've missed or you want additional information on, just feel free to interrupt. I'll pause after each slide just to make sure that there's no questions as we move along. So the first topic is the call answer time. We sent out letters to PSAPs that were below 85% call answer time within 15 seconds. We received responses back from all 25 of the PSAPs that we sent the letter to. And what we've got on this slide here is a summary of what they reported back to us as far as barriers. So if you're doing the math in your head, you'll see it doesn't add up to 100% because we allowed them to check more than one box as to what was contributing to the problem. So some of them stated that it was equipment related, and we have an equipment replacement cycle to address that, and we've met with those 5 and working through solutions to address that. It's probably one of the easier ones on the slide to address. Lack of staffing, 92% of those surveyed said that was a contributing factor. So various factors contributed to that. Some didn't provide any details. Some said there were vacancies, and this is the overview of that. So we'll begin working with each of those PSAPs to see what assistance we can provide. Some cited it was increased workload in the PSAP. Those of you that are PSAP managers understand that that's definitely something that has to be considered. And then there were 4 that cited some other reason. So we'll continue to work with these 25 PSAPs, and I'll provide updates as we move through this. Each quarter, we'll rerun the stats to see how many of them are no longer at that 85% or lower. So we hope to see that 25 number decline over time. Any questions on that? All right, the next topic we're going to talk about is our wireless routing project, or the wireless technical routing analysis project. So each quarter we look at every cell sector in 1/4 of the states. We've broken the state up into quarters. Each quarter we look at all the PSAPs that are in that particular area, those counties that are in that area, and we look at every single cell sector in those counties and analyze where the call was first sent and see if it needs to be sent to a different PSAP. You see, we reviewed a total of almost 70,000 sectors last quarter, and you see on the statistics on the far right, about 7.33% of those were routed to another PSAP. So in other words, the routing algorithm that's in there now was changed in 7% of the times. You can look down that column and note there's a couple of counties, Mono in particular, where there was a huge benefit provided by this study in that 34% were readjusted in that county. That really helps the response time if we get the 911 call to the correct PSAP the first time. This project will be ongoing each year. The cell providers are continually adding new towers, new sectors. They're doing maintenance. Numerous factors can impact where that 911 call is routed. And so this is a continuous process, and we work really closely with CHP through this, and we appreciate all your support on this. I know this is a heavy lift for you guys as well. Yeah. So any questions on the wireless routing project?
Bud, just a quick question on how many of the changes have actually been enacted by the carriers. I know we were behind for a period of time. They seem to have caught back up. Are they continuing to maintain that pace, or are they slipping back again?
So some of the carriers are better at applying the changes than others. There is a lag right now. And so once we ask them to apply the change, we need a year of data to verify that the change we made is acceptable. And so if they get too far behind, when the next quarter comes around and they haven't made the change in a timely manner, we can't reanalyze that sector. So we're going to start providing those statistics for you in January when we go back around and we realize which carriers have or have not applied the change. So I'll have those stats for you next time. All right, seeing no further questions. This is a good news story here. The red letters at the bottom of this slide are probably the key. All agencies in California will be taking wireless calls. So we've worked a long time, very hard on this project. And you see the final status of the last three up there. They've all are either in the process or actually are actively now accepting wireless calls. So next time we brief, this slide will be removed because we're 100% deployed. Any questions?
Could you just report how many years this slide has been on when you do take it off? Because it's been a lot.
Yeah, 17 years?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So congratulations.
It has taken a long time.
Right.
Yeah. After
Congrats.
17 years, we've successfully deployed. We've learned a lot through this deployment, and other deployments of other technologies will be handled slightly different because of the lessons learned here.
I would like to say, for the record, congratulations, Bud, you and your team, and also to the CHP team. It's been a long, heavy lift, and this is an exciting time. So thank you for that.
All right, the next slide, we're going to talk about our fiscal and operational reviews. So these are the reviews that we go out to the PSAP and we take a look at what they're doing and making sure that they're in alliance or in compliance with the operations manual. We take a look at the customer premise equipment that they've got installed, the circuits, and we answer any questions they have. If they're coming up on their replacement cycle, we help them through that process as well. The goal is to do about 30 of these each quarter, so that way we touch every PSAP 2 times during an equipment replacement cycle. And you see the stats on the slide there. The September 1st through December 31st, that 21 completed, that was when the slide was generated, which was about 3 weeks ago. That number is actually 38. So you can see for the last quarter, we exceeded our goal of 38. And we've got a pretty aggressive schedule because we know that there are many PSAPs out there that we have not seen in a while, and we want to get out there and provide them this assistance. We also offer this up. We have a regular schedule, but if there is a PSAP who would like us to come, and we're not, and they're not on our radar to come there soon, let us know, and we'll move them up in the schedule so that we can make sure that we go and reach out to them. Any questions on the forward process? All right, the next slide, give a little update on some of our contracts. We had a foreign language contract. There was a protest that was entered in there. We didn't have a status at the time of the slide. However, since then, that has all been resolved, and the contract has been awarded to Syracom, and we're working on the contract and award and kickoff, and by the next time this board meets, we'll probably have some definitive timelines of what that transition will look like as this new service provider is rolled out statewide. The next couple of contracts, we learned some new information since this board last met. So we have a next-gen IFB or RFP that's out there, and we've awarded two different solutions, one in the northeast portion of the state to ROI and Synergem to build out a solution for next-gen 911 for 36 PSAPs, and another one in the Pasadena area for 8 PSAPs there. And those projects are already in motion. Once we started the process and the vendor selected began to engage with the originating service providers to route the traffic to the ESI net, we realized that they needed to have a CPCN and be registered through the California Public Utilities Commission because they were routing 911 traffic. And the CPUC provided clarification to us that any 911 service had to be tariffed. So we could have a contract, that's fine, but once that vendor begins to engage and provide those services, they have to register with the CPUC and they have to have a tariff in place. So that created a scenario where we had a contract that potentially had one set of rules, conditions, terms, SLAs, and a tariff that had a different set, because there's no direct correlation. We have a lot of input working with the California Department of Technology on the contract, but the vendor submits the tariff to the CPUC. There is a period where we get to provide some input. However, once it's established, it's really between that vendor and the PUC. So these projects have been impacted by that tariff requirement, as well as the next project, the Text to 911 IFB. Text to 911 is clearly a 911 service, as well as next-gen 911. And so we were on the process of moving down a procurement path to select a vendor to do Text to 911. And we know we can finish that process, but now we run into this same tariff complexity. So we took a close look at what we were doing, and we, with the help of a consultant that we've been working with, we began to look at moving all of these services from the contract environment completely into the tariff environment. That's the way the 911 network is today. All the camera trunks, the selective routers, the alley database, and everything that we're doing to route a 911 call today, with few exceptions, is all done through a tariff. It's been that way for decades. There are very distinct advantages to having a tariff, and there's some challenges. So we had a meeting with the vendors on December 19th to talk through our vision of what we wanted to do with the tariff, which was 2 days ago, mind you, to get some feedback from them and provide them some guidance on the major components that we'd like to see. And when we get to the next gen slides, I'll show you where that's at. So right now, the path that we're working down is we know we must have a tariff, regardless of what we do in the contract world. And it makes more sense to us to just move completely into that tariff environment, rather than have a tariff that might be slightly different than a contract. And then when the contract ends, you have this problem that the tariff is not. And so you have to deconflict that process. So that's what we're moving toward, and I'll talk a little bit about timelines on the next slide. But before we move off contracts, I want to see if anybody has any questions. All right, so the tariff discussion feeds right into next gen. So we've talked through this slide a few times. The technology for next gen is based on the NENA I3 standard. It's well developed, the technology is there, and we know the path forward there. We've done a tremendous amount of work in collaboration, both with the PSAPs and with the vendors, and any regulatory agency or any other state that's deployed this, or anyone else that knows anything about next gen, to make sure that we understand a path forward. And we know about the funding. I'll talk a little bit about that in a couple more slides. It was this procurement piece that we were really trying to solve. We weren't sure whether we needed a tariff or a contract or a combination of the two. Now we know. We need a tariff. That's the path forward. So we had that meeting with them, and what we did was we came up with basically 4 categories for the tariff. There's this transitional work that needs to happen to transition from legacy over to next gen, and there's a bunch of components of that. There's some next gen 911 trunking, so that would be like the routing that gets the information passed through. And there's next gen 911 core services. So think of that as the selective routers, the alley database, and all the other services you have to provide to get the 911 call with the information from the caller all the way to the PSAP. That's another big bucket. And then you've got to aggregate all the calls coming in from the originating service providers, whether it's wireline or wireless or voice over IP or some other technology like text. All of that has to happen so the calls come in, get aggregated, and I have a slide on that. So those are the 4 major buckets of the tariff that we talked about. We talked through the components of them, and we're moving forward in that process. This is a high-level depiction of what I'm talking about. So on the far left-hand side of the slide, you've got, I think I have a pointer, but maybe not. You have originating service providers that would come into some aggregation point that would be handled via tariff with redundancy. There's some sort of an IP switch there that would route the call to the regional ESI net. If the regional ESI net is not available, then it would send it to the prime ESI net as a backup. That call would be handled through next-gen 911 core services inside those ESI nets and delivered out to the PSAP. That's essentially what this shows. And the tariffs are established for each of these major demarc points in the network so that we have one hand to shake as we move through each piece of this puzzle. And that's the path forward. The other big change on this diagram is that CapsNet microwave backhaul piece across the top. We've learned in recent disasters when 30-plus miles of fiber burn up, the backhaul goes away, and even though we design and engineer multiple paths into the PSAP over those backhaul connections, a disaster of that size can take down both of those links with different providers that are geographically diverse and different paths into the PSAP. So we're going to build out the state microwave and provide a completely separate path into the PSAP so that in the event of a disaster like what occurred in October, we have another path into the PSAP. That will take some time to build out, and we'll prioritize those PSAPs that need that connection first, but that'll be the piece of redundancy that we provide to the network. So any questions on this before we go on? This slide has changed slightly since the last time that we talked. We've broken the state up into regions and tried to find a balance between number of regions and risk versus call volume and number of PSAPs. So the lines are drawn so that those PSAPs that commonly work together are in the same region, and the regions are all roughly the same size. So the North has about 7.1 million calls, 7.2 million calls a year, 163 PSAPs. The Central area is about 5.2 million calls a year with 110 PSAPs. The LA region, which we had before 2 separate ones, we've merged together, that has about 8.6 million calls a year with 79 PSAPs. And then the Southern area, which has changed slightly from the last time we talked, is 7.2 million and 89 PSAPs. Over top of all of that is the prime, which will serve as a backup and help facilitate some of the statewide coordination that we need to do. So this will be the model going forward, and then once the tariffs are established, we will align and select a vendor to build out each of these portions of the state. The funding model, we have not changed this slide since the last time, so this has not changed. As we build out next gen, the cost transition from the legacy column over to the NG911 column. And again, I think these numbers are fairly conservative, and our goal is to come in under these numbers. This is the other change that has happened. Before, we had our prime and our north starting in January, February timeframe. The tariff process will likely take us into June or July in order to have those tariffs in place. So these dates reflect when we would select someone under tariff and they would begin work. We've given about 24 months for each of the regions and the prime. And then we've provided if you do the math and you see all the selective routers decommissioned by 2022, that's to allow us to fully transition the traffic off of the selective routers, out of the alley database, and into this next-gen environment. So that's what our timeline looks like. Any questions on that? We're currently making some updates to our operations manual. Most of these have been in place since the last time we talked, but we just wanted to highlight them. Operations Manual Chapter 3 talks about our customer premise equipment and the replacement and what's allowable, what's not allowable. That has been updated recently. We've added Chapter 10 to address text to 911 deployment. Tracy will address that later when she gives an update on the text to deployment through the County Coordinators Task Force. In addition, because the tariff lists a service, there has to be some way to define SLAs and details that might not be able to be expressed in a tariff because they're specific to an application. So we're going to need to add Chapter 11 to our operations manual to address all those details. So we're working on that now, and that'll provide the framework for the vendors and carriers when they write and submit their tariffs so that they know, this, basically the plan that we've been verbalizing, we'll have to put that down in a statement of work sort of format in that chapter of our operations manual, and the tariff will point to that for additional information. And we hope to have the first draft of Chapter 11 released in the middle of January as guidance to those that are working on the tariffs.
But
That's it on next gen, so we'll see if we have questions.
Just on the incremental costs, are the consultants pointing that out to the PSAPs when they come up for renewal? Because I know that furniture has been for a long time one and is no longer an incremental cost, and that's a pretty significant budget item for most PSAPs to account for.
Yes, we have let them know that furniture was removed from the incremental costs, and we've had many discussions along those lines. Yeah.
When they start the process, when they originally go to the consultant, that would be great just to remind them, because I know we just went through it, and it's a significant expense.
Yeah, and we definitely, our consultants are working with them as they start the process and they submit their initial approval to replace their CPE. We have that conversation with them on what's allowable and what's not allowable. So this next graph has not changed from the last time. This is a graph showing the SETNA account, the State Emergency Telephone Number account. And you can see the green line is total revenues, which is the surcharge revenues plus the prior year balance that we had. And you can see when that line crosses the light blue line is when we begin to have problems, because we have less revenue than we have expenditures. And so we've been working very aggressively to correct the funding model to make the system sustainable. And we'll have more word on that the next time we meet, and I'll have an updated chart. The fires in October and some of the other things that we've been doing in OES have prevented us from getting these final budget numbers. They usually come in near the beginning of December, and this year they're pushing a little bit out as we're working on the budgets for next year. So we'll have updated charts for you next time, and hopefully a much more thorough update of that. And again, this slide has not changed either, and it's showing that going into this fiscal year, we have about a $3 million rainy day that we'll be carrying over. And that previous chart shows that you can see up there from the revenues versus total resources, when those things go upside down, then that fund balance goes negative, and that will probably happen within the next 2 years. That's why the time for corrective action is now. So with that, I'll entertain any questions that you may have before we move on to the next agenda item.
Judge, a quick question on, and hate to go all the way back to the beginning, but 85% that are not answering the calls within the first 15 seconds. Being the second piece is that staffing. What if any advice or what are we giving those individual PSAPs that are having that problem with staffing? How can we help with that?
So we've had a couple of PSAPs who have used the letter we sent them to go to their board and show them the importance of meeting that standard, and that's given them the information they need to get some forward momentum to hire additional folks or authorize overtime and some of that. So we see a definite need here to get the word out on some of the success stories and challenges that are out there. So we've been, and I think there's going to be an update on this from you, Paul, when you talk about the Cal-NENA or from the LRPC. But at the Cal-NENA meeting in the end of February, we're going to have a panel discussion with PSAPs who have been successful in addressing these staffing issues, and with those that have questions, as well as the 911 branch will be there, and then members of the LRPC, so we can begin to engage in a dialogue. And as those 25 contact us with questions, we put them in contact with their peers who have addressed this issue so they can apply the lessons learned. So we're trying to make those connections and help them through that process. And so if there's a PSAP listening that needs some, interface from the 911 branch, let us know, and we'll definitely reach out to them and help them.
Any other questions for Mr. Courier? Hearing none, we'll move on to agenda item number 8, which is the Long Range Planning Committee report. Mr. Cullen?
Thank you. Budge covered most of the topics that were discussed at yesterday's Long Range Planning Committee meeting, but I did want to mention again that the Cal-NENA conference occurs from February 26th through March 2nd down in La Jolla, California. And it really is a great conference that focuses exclusively on 911 and all the different aspects of 911. We had about 400 attendees last year, if I'm not mistaken, Paul. It's a great partnership with the state. One of the reasons I think this conference is so successful is that we do have the state office participating, all of the state consultants and most of the state board or state office staff are down there. There'll be a number of breakout sessions that are very informative, and it's an opportunity for PSAP, law enforcement, or fire representatives to meet directly with the state to answer any questions that they have. So we're hoping for high participation this year. It looks like it's going to be a very successful conference. There's a technology aspect as well as 43 breakout sessions. Is that right, Paul?
Actually, this morning, the number changed. We're up to 49.
Oh,
We
great.
had some requests for late submissions. So in previous years, our breakouts have been repeated. This year, we might not be able to repeat because there are so many good breakout sessions being presented.
So it's a great opportunity to cover a lot of topics in a short period of time. So certainly if you have the time and the wherewithal to get to this conference, it's highly beneficial. One of the things that we are going to do at Cal-NENA is put out a questionnaire to our membership to ask what issues or questions they have for the state office about the many different aspects of 911, from next gen to funding to the equipment placement process works now, and we have those questions. We'll get them to the state so that they can be prepared to address those issues during the time frame they have at the conference. Other than that, I think the one other outstanding issue for the Long Range Planning Committee is the working group that is going to be put together this spring for next-gen implementation. And I know the state is looking to get personnel from various size PSAPs and maybe even some of the other disciplines to participate in that working group to provide advice and guidance on the rollout of next-gen. So it'll be a very busy year and a lot of things going on. I would like to commend the state office on all of the things that have happened this year. I've never seen things moving forward as quickly as they have this year. The planning's been outstanding. I think we have a roadmap to where we need to get to. The financial aspect of CETNA, I believe, will be addressed in the near future. So a lot of positive things, and kudos to the state office for all their efforts this year.
Thank you. Moving on to agenda item number, are any questions for Mr. Cullen? Moving on to agenda item number 9, update from Tracy Kessler on the County Coordinator Task Force.
Good afternoon. The County Coordinator Task Force does not have any open projects right now beyond providing support for seasoned county coordinators and new county coordinators. Aside from that, I'm going to be providing you with information from the Cali OES Text to 911 project. And these stats that I'll be showing you were provided by the State 911 branch. So the deployed county PSAP counties and PSAPs are 129, and 18 of remaining CHP statewide agencies have submitted their letters to the FCC, and 67 either counties or PSAPs have selected the TCC. And also, LA County is deployed, and they conducted their public service announcement on December 1st. So things are going well for LA County with the text to 911. Also, the Cal or State 911 branch sent out 364 letters asking agencies when they will be deploying, and these are the numbers that came back. 112 have been deployed, 50 plan on being deployed by February, 49 by June, and 151 by December. 30 are still developing deployment plans. And that is all I have, unless you have any questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on.
Quickly, sorry, no question, but just a comment since LA County, we finally went live. I've probably been talking for a year. Just want to keep pushing it. Obviously, you saw there's a lot of good responses there, but still 100 plus PSAPs that didn't respond to the State 911 office about text. So prior to us going live in LA County December 1st, many agencies there were in a soft live status. So without the public press release, agencies were live behind the scenes so dispatchers could get familiar with the program. And LA City has a lot of, obviously, success stories, but one that came across an email to us from Ella Sotelo, who's the chair of the CCTF. There was a group of hard of hearing folks in a park in LA. Somebody there fell, hit their head, was knocked unconscious, and someone within that group was able to text 911, and the fire department and paramedics were able to respond. So it's stories like that, which is why everyone in the PSAP community needs to take steps forward to get text to 911 into their PSAP. So thanks, Tracy.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Agenda item number 10 is the dates for future meetings throughout 2018, March 8th, June 7th, September 6th, and December 6th. If there are any conflicts, please let the 911 branch know so we can hopefully make some adjustments, but as of today, that's where we are shooting for. Any questions regarding that? Public comment. Do we have any requests for public comment? Okay, hearing none. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you.